Well, hello, and welcome, everyone, to Life Beats Radio. I am your host, Dawn Mack, and just so very glad to be here with you tonight, and so glad that you are here with us as well, listening in. And it's Thursday evening, finally. We are at Friday Eve. Tomorrow is Friday. The weekend's coming, and I know a lot of you will be wrapping up your work week tomorrow and getting ready and looking forward to a wonderful weekend ahead. At least I hope that you will. And tonight we are just so very honored to have our special guest with us this evening. It's a huge honor. And to give you a little background on them, our special guest this evening is a New York Times best-selling novelist and biographer. He is the author of over 180 books. Can you believe that? Including the 63 million selling Left Behind series. He is the former editor of Moody Magazine, vice president for publishing, and now chairman of the board of trustees for the Moody Bible Institute of Chicago. He is the owner of Jenkins Entertainment, a filmmaking company in Chicago which produced the critically acclaimed Hometown Legend, and is also the owner of the Christian Writers Guild, which aims to train tomorrow's professional Christian writers and has more than 1,000 members worldwide. We are so very honored and proud to welcome Jerry C. Jenkins. Hello. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Dawn. Great to be with you.
Well, it's quite an honor, as I said, to have you here, and we greatly appreciate it. As I was preparing for this interview, I truly felt like I was taking in a history lesson of sorts. Because having known you for the critically acclaimed Left Behind series, it would seem that you have lent your God-given gifts and talents so many different directions and on so many different things. So, I mean, wow, what an impressive resume of accomplishments you have your credit, and it's just mind-blowing almost. What do you attribute it to, mostly? I mean, it's just a result of, it seems like a lot of doors that have opened for you.
Well, it's a funny thing. People always want to know, why do you write so many books? And I'm not trying to be falsely modest, but I really feel like I've only been given one gift, and that's writing. I mean, I don't sing or dance or preach. This is all I do. And so my feeling is that if you've only been given one gift, you're obligated to exercise it to its maximum. So, I know people that are much more widely gifted in their they're preaching and speaking and doing all these other things. Maybe if I had those gifts, I would spread myself a little thinner too. But for me, it's writing, and so I just don't say no. I mean, if there's a worthy project, I'm happy to jump in and see what I can do with it. Of course, the joke is a lot of people think I've written more books than I've ever read.
Well, I would imagine when you're writing, you're reading what you're writing, but do you actually ever make time to read, given the fact that you are writing so much?
Actually, I'm a voracious reader, and when I teach writers, I always say that writers are readers, good writers are good readers, and great writers are great readers, because especially now with the advent of the Kindle, these electronic reading gadgets and everything, I'm reading more than ever. I've probably got 200 books on my phone alone, and I'm usually reading 3 or 4 books at a time because they're so handy. You can just switch back and forth. If you read a novel, read a few chapters, and then you want to read a nonfiction book or a history book, you can do that. So, yeah, if I'm not writing, I'm usually reading.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned you read several at a time, because I thought I was one of the few in the world that does that sort of thing. And and it wasn't until like several years ago when some of my friends and I were just chatting one day about reading in general, and someone made mention of that, and it was just like, oh my gosh, so this must be pretty common, And you're right. I mean, with the Kindle, you can kind of jump ship and read a lot of different material, and I think it allows you to get through more books than we could have ever done in the past, which is the great thing about the Kindle.
Yeah, I don't know why it's something we do more now with a Kindle than we did with regular books, because you had the regular books around too. But maybe it's just the idea that you feel obligated once you've started to finish, and of course nowadays the time is so limited with all the things we have to do. I like the advantage too of being able to download a sample of a book and not waste your time or money if it doesn't grab you. But if it does, you just get it and and like you say, you can read 3 or 4 at a time.
And I think you said the key word there, download, the ease, the convenience of consumers being able to just download the product right onto their electronic device. And, nowadays the cloud is popular, and they can just sync it between all their devices, and no matter if it's their phone, your iPad, or whatever it may be, they've got access to it anytime they want it. And it's a lot easier carrying around that than it is a book, or 2 or 3 books for that matter. So I think it has inspired a lot of people to read more than ever before, which I think is really a wonderful thing. Now, you're writing when did you first realize that writing was what God wanted you to do, or it was your God-given gift?
It really came in high school. I got hurt playing sports in high school, and I wanted to stay close to that sports scene. So I've always been a reader, and I love to read sports pages and Sports Illustrated. So I heard that a local paper was looking for somebody to cover high school sports, and so I can remember sending them samples of my writing that were handwritten, not even typed, and they said, we'll give you a try. And I became a stringer for the local paper, and stringer is somebody who just covers a certain beat, and that's, for me, was just high school sports. And it was 2 years even before I was old enough to drive. So I consider myself a professional writer since I was 14, because my parents would have to drive me to the games and drive me to the newspaper office. And of course I wasn't any good yet. I had to learn the craft and get all the cliches out of my system and all that. But I think it was a real advantage at that age to realize that I'd found my niche, and that's what I was going to be doing for my life. And then it wasn't too long after that as a teenager that I felt called to full-time Christian work. And I remember thinking at that time, I guess I'll have to give up the sports writing and become a pastor or a missionary. And I didn't realize that God usually prepares you before he calls you. And I was prepared and being prepared to be a writer. And so it really was gratifying to realize as I grew up and got married and followed that call, that the call was actually to full-time Christian work as a writer. So that's been a really fulfilling and thrilling thing to do for my whole life.
I know. I mean, that's one thing that I've actually always really enjoyed is writing. I was writing at a young age, and just any and everything, plays, poems, you name it. And then back several years ago, I just woke up one morning and I had this idea in my mind as soon as I awakened, and I got to the computer and I just put it down, and I said, okay, I'm going to put this away. And I didn't think anything would ever come from it. And it was like, God just kept tapping me on the shoulder saying, you need to hear, I'm giving you some more. And I would keep writing, and before I knew it, I had a whole novel cranked out, and I've never published it. It's been a very slow working process with editing. I've been working with a friend to get it edited. But, it's interesting that you say that, because it's like people will tell me a lot, you have this way with words, and sometimes I read things I write, and I just go, how did I do that? So then I say, well, it's got to be God, because if it was left to my own devices, I think it would be a complete failure. But
yeah, I hear you. And that's a good thing for people to recognize, yeah.
But, it's funny because, and the reason I'm sharing this with you is because initially when I started out writing the book, I was really, I remember telling my friend who was an editor for a newspaper in Houston, I remember telling him, I really want this to be a Christian fiction type novel. I really don't want to go secular mainstream. And, and as the story kind of unfolded, it was like I was so torn and I was conflicted, and I've been in prayer about it, but it's been so hard to say, well, how do I want this to go? But I keep going back to God gave me this, and at the same time, if he's planted the seed within me, it's pretty obvious what type of novel it needs to be. And so, it's just interesting how, our inner selves will sometimes fight with us and, within as to what we really need to do. So it's been a work in progress. It really has. And at any time, as you, in your early writing career, did you ever, have those moments, even after you knew that you wanted to do Christian writing, did you have those moments of conflict within yourself about it?
Well, not conflict about, following the call, but the biggest thing was to try to figure out if God has called me to do this, I don't think he's called me exclusively to equip the saints. Now, that's a biblical, commandment or it's at least a description of, people that are called to do that, some for the equipping of the saints and teaching and pastoring and that type of thing. But then, others of us are to do both, encourage the church, equip the saints, but also cross over and reach the secular market. And so I think it became a really important thing in my career when I had to learn to acknowledge where my audience was coming from. If I was going to write about the end times and the rapture of the church and the millennial kingdom and all that, if that was to cross over, if people were to pass those along to their friends, I had to write them in such a way that they didn't sound so crazy and weird. I mean, I just had to put myself in the place of a secular person who either has no church background or who has had a bad church background, and what will they think about this? And so, in writing those novels, I just tried to say, how is this going to come across to the reader, and what are they going to think if this happens? And so I put a lot of what I call credible skeptics in the story. So people who say, how can you say this is of God when the rapture happens and a whole bunch of people die because people are disappearing out of their cars and airplanes and stuff like that? And I think that's one of the reasons that made that series cross over so much, because I think the secular reader liked the story and wanted to find out what happened, but also realized that it wasn't preaching, it wasn't sermonic, it wasn't somebody trying to teach them something. It was simply a story that told what we believe is going to happen someday.
Yeah, for sure. And let's talk a little bit about the Left Behind series, because 63 million people out there came to love it, and it's just highly successful. And the obvious inspiration was the end times prophecy, and was writing these books, although fiction yet based on scripture, an opportunity for you, and I think you hit on that just now, was to personally learn more about this fascinating era of time. I mean, had you already kind of studied the end times before you wrote, the Left Behind series, or was this an opportunity for you to kind of dive deeper and look at it from both sides of the coin, from a Christian perspective, a secular perspective, and broaden your knowledge and education about it?
Yeah, it really was an educational experience for me. I'm not a scholar or a theologian, but I was raised in the church that had that same tradition, where they believed that someday the rapture of the church would happen, and then the tribulation, and then the millennial kingdom. And so when Dr. LaHaye came to me with the idea of putting his nonfiction, ideas into fiction, because he realized that everybody's reading novels, it resonated with me because I agreed with it, and I didn't have a problem with the theology. But he's the theologian and scholar, and it was his idea. And so I got the fun part. I got to make up the stories and write the books, and I feel like I spent 10 years in the LaHaye seminary, just learning at his feet about what was going on. I would write 100 or 200 pages at a time and send them to him and say, now, make sure I'm still on track theologically. And besides doing that, he was a great cheerleader, and he would say, I want to see what happens myself, so keep writing,
Yeah. Well, what was the response like by readers? But obviously Christian readers they really just ate it up. But secular readers in particular, I mean, did you and Dr. LaHaye, did you get kind of feedback from the reading audience? Hearing stories from folks, for example, that were indicating they had become saved as a result of reading the series. I mean, was it life-changing for people?
Yeah, we decided from the beginning that we started hearing so many stories, a lot of them secondhand. We said, let's only record and keep track of people who tell us personally, either in person at an autograph party or a meeting or something, or write us a letter or send us an email or call us on the phone, somebody that tells us about their own experience. And we have collected more than 3,000 of those stories, and we think it represents many more because people don't, contact us. But, there's nothing like that. I mean, people say, well, isn't it thrilling to have a bestseller and to get a big royalty check and all that type of thing? Nothing compares with somebody telling you that, almost every writer has readers who say, oh, your book changed my life. But when people tell us that, they mean it literally. They've gone from darkness to light. They've gone from death to life. And nothing compares. I mean, if we never got a dime from doing this or appeared on any bestseller list, those stories are just never grow old, and people still to this day will come up and say, and they often are apologetic. They'll say, "Oh, I'm sure you hear this all the time, but I'm one who came to Christ through reading these books," and I'm thinking, how could that ever get old? That's the most thrilling thing. It's the reason we wrote these, and so yeah, it's been great. In fact, we had an old friend put together a book based on a lot of the responses, and it was called "These Will Not Be Left Behind," and it was just testimonies of people who had come to Christ through these.
That is amazing. I mean, it really does put into perspective, the objectives behind, what you and Dr. LaHaye were trying to accomplish by writing the series, even though it was fiction, but yet it was based on truth and theology, and it's obviously the appeal of the series went far beyond the realm of it being a series of books, that people could read and look forward to the next edition coming out. I mean, it meant so much more than that, not only to you, so for writing it, but to the millions of readers who read it. And that's just amazing. That like you say, that there is no price you can put on that sort of feedback and result of your work. None whatsoever.
And what was so strange was that, in the past, before Left Behind, when Christian publishers wanted to reach the secular market, they usually tried to sort of sneak up on them. They would use a slightly less overt title or description of the book, and they might even put a different publisher name on the spine. Instead of being the name of a publishing company that's obviously Christian, they would just use a generic name. And then somebody might buy the book because it's about romance or marriage or business or success, and then you throw a few Bible verses in and you try to get them, to think about God. Well, we hoped that Left Behind would be a crossover success because we wanted people to come to Christ, but we didn't really expect it because we didn't try to sneak up on them. I mean, here's a Christian minister and a Christian writer writing for the publisher that published the Living Bible, and the books are about the rapture of the church at the end of time, Jesus coming in the sky and all that. And yet it became the biggest crossover success ever. And more than half the sales were in secular outlets. And when it was being listed on the New York Times, every time one would come out, it would come out as number one. They weren't even counting the books that were sold in Christian bookstores, which was our base, because they thought those were specialty shops and they didn't really count. And so just based on the secular sales alone, they were number one. So it was just beyond anything we ever imagined.
Well, one thing that's always fascinated me is that how unbelievers, they claim they don't believe in God, but my son and I have this conversation a lot. He's very much into the Lord and loves him and really is following him already, short of being 18. And he and I have had this conversation, and I've always said to him, I said, the unbelievers out there who claim they don't believe in Christ and have no belief in God Almighty have to have at least realized that there was something to believe in order to decide not to believe in it. And he's like, Mom, that's deep. But I said, well, it's so true because, it's just like anything else that we see in life or we hear about. We can choose to believe or not believe it, but we have to first acknowledge that it exists in order to make that choice. And that's a choice. And so, the beauty of these books and the series is that, you guys, as you said, just put it right out there what the series was about. There was, you weren't trying to sneak it in on anyone. You were very front and center about it. And, the secular market they gravitated towards it in such a way that I'm sure was just mind-blowing for you both, beyond your wildest imaginations, as they say.
Yeah, it really was. And we heard stories from people who said, they would say, I was atheistic, non-practicing Jew, and this book was given to me by somebody who's just like me, who's an atheistic, non-practicing Jew, and said to me, don't worry about all the religious stuff in it. You'll just like the story. And they said, I read the story, and I saw the truth, and I became a believer. So in essence, they were being witnessed to by somebody who didn't believe. They didn't even realize it.
Yeah, it would be hard to read the books and not have some form of belief in it because of the realism and because of what it's based on. I mean, even if, an unbeliever reads the book, it's just my opinion that the story is so good that it draws them in, and they have to question, hey, is this for real? Is this really going to happen? I mean, I think it does make them question a lot of things on the opposite end of the spectrum versus, what they had questioned in the past. Now, having created a fiction story based on theology and the end times and the rapture, do you believe, or did you try to craft a story that the end times will be very much like you describe in the book? Did you try to get it as close to that, because I would think you would want it to come across as being believable, and of course, having read it, I thought so. But I'm also a believer. But to the average unbeliever, I mean, do you actually believe that the end times are like what is described in the book?
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the hallmarks of my kind of fiction is I liked, and it's sort of an interesting dynamic today, because the definitions of fiction and nonfiction have kind of flipped. Fiction is by definition not true. And obviously nonfiction is something that's not false. So. And yet, fiction to work has to be believable. If you write something that's so fantastic, people go, "Oh, that would never happen," then they don't like it even as fiction. So even if it's a fantasy, or things like, the Lord of the Rings and that type of thing, you have to be able to have some credibility, and it has to make sense. So my feeling was I wanted to write this as if it was actually going to happen this way, and obviously, I made up the names, I made up the characters and their occupations and all that, but I put those characters in the way of events that are predicted in Scripture. So I'm saying, imagine, if you will, that this happens 10 years from now, or 50 years from now, or 100 years from now. This is what it would look like, and this is how people would react. And so hopefully it's close enough that, if it does happen and people are still not believing, I think they're going to be looking for these books and trying to find out what the deal was.
What to expect, because it's really, the series itself is so true to form to Scripture, and what is prophesied as that will happen. I think people who may still have some skepticism about them, like you say, they're going to be grabbing for it, going, okay, which one of these books is going to tell us what's going to happen here? Let's refer back to this if they've read them in the past.
Right.
Now, this brings me to an interesting question for you. Do you believe that we are actually living in the end times currently?
That's a really good question, because Dr. LaHaye does. He believes that the Lord's going to return in his lifetime. And he just turned 87. So I like to tease him and say it's going to have to be fairly soon, But I actually believe that it could be today, or it could be as much as 1,000 years from now, because the Scripture says that to God, a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. So if he, in his mercy, decides to wait one more day in his economy of time, that could be 1,000 of our years. So I think we're told to be watching and waiting for the imminent return, but obviously imminent means something different to God than it does to us, because it's been imminent in Scripture for 2,000 years. So, I think it'd be really foolish to say, it's not going to happen for a long time, but it could be that he waits,
Well, and because we simply just don't know when it will happen, no one knows but him. Then but I've had conversations with my believer friends about this very thing, and we do discuss. A lot of us do believe we are in the end times. I mean, it's interesting that Dr. LaHaye has that belief that it will happen in his lifetime. I've heard other older people that are his age or older that have said the same thing. And in the same token, I mean, it does make you pause and say, I mean, I've said so many times, like, recently we have the Boston bombings, and I remember telling a friend of mine, I said, it just makes me wonder, when God sees this unfold, he's all-knowing anyway, and obviously knows what's going to happen. It just makes you wonder at what point he's going to say to Christ, okay, it's time. And, how bad do things have to get when Scripture tells us that we've not seen anything yet in terms of, what we won't see, obviously, that are raptured. But it's just interesting to think how bad does it have to get? When does he say enough is enough? When does he say, okay, this is the last straw? You know, you just imagine God finally pulling the plug and going, okay, it's time. And only he knows that. Only he knows what the most devastating thing is going to be before that happens. But it does make you wonder as things continue to unfold.
Yeah, and that time will come. That's one of the things that, you know, the more successful Left Behind became, the more it was criticized, and especially the secular press. They hadn't heard this side of God's character, this vengeful side, this justice side, and they would say, "Oh, you made that part up about him, you know, slaying his enemies or taking his vengeance out." And I said, you know, if you think that God is only love and not justice and not retribution for you know, stubbornness and sin and rejection, you haven't read the whole Bible. We didn't make that part up. That stuff is in there. And you know, they said, "Oh, we thought God was love." Well, you know, God is love, and he has offered everybody an escape from this. But when they thumb their nose at him, and as you say, how bad does it have to get? If it were up to us, it'd be over by now, you know.
Oh, yeah.
But God is a God of mercy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think he gives everyone every last possible opportunity to receive his grace and forgiveness and mercy, you know, and you know, and I guess some people, and you know, the other thing that when you mentioned that, it's about the secular press. You know, I know a lot of my, you know, I have some unbeliever friends, and they will challenge me. They will say, well, you know, if your God is so loving, and so why would he allow the bombing to happen, or why would he allow this to happen? And you know, and I have to go into the diatribe about the whys and the hows of how he is and why he does what he does, based on my personal understanding. And you know, and they always throw that question out there to try. They think they're tripping me up, and you know, but it's a level of understanding that even though you don't have full realization and understanding of how God truly is and why he does what he does, you just have. That's where trust and faith comes into play, and you know, and that becomes something that I think some people really struggle with because they have a hard time believing in something they can't see. Is what it really boils down to.
That's it, and you know, God is not easily explained, even by those who believe in him and love him and all that. But I loved Anne Graham Lotz's response to that when people said, "Where was God?" You know, when these tragedies happened, like the school shootings and stuff. And she said, "Look, you can't legislate God out of school and then beg him to be there when something bad happens." Yeah, you know, that's
right.
You can't have it both ways. You know, first of all, they don't want anything to do with him, and now they're saying, "Well, where was he when this bad stuff came?" You know.
Yeah, it's an oxymoron almost, and that's true. I mean, if we had God in all the places he's not allowed in to spend time, we wouldn't be having and seeing the tragedies and the insurmountable things. But it's you know, it is just indicative of the sin-fallen world that we live in that continues to, you know, and how Satan is ruler of this world and how he is having his time, and God is allowing him to have his time because in his time he will no longer have that. So he shouldn't, you know, he's enjoying it while he can, I guess is the best way to put that. And, you know, well, aside from this series, you know, you're also a well-revered biographer, and you've written biographies of people like Hank Aaron and Bill Gaither, and, I mean, the list goes on. And you also assisted Dr. Billy Graham with a couple of his memoirs, which you have said was a privilege of a lifetime. What was it like for you to have that experience?
It really was amazing. I grew up, you know, revering him and you know, watching him on television, hearing him on radio, reading his books and that type of thing. And to be asked to assist him, it was his memoir called Just As I Am. And I probably worked with him over a period of about 12 or 13 months, and I would go we lived in the Chicago area at the time, and I would go down to North Carolina to visit him in Black Mountain area. And he's just the same behind closed doors as he is in public. He's truly humble. I think that's one of the most attractive characteristics of the Christ-like character. And my wife said, you know, when I would come back, it was like I was walking on air for a few days, you know. But just a thrill. I mean, he gave me access to all of his material, and I got to talk to him, you know, a lot. And it was fun to meet the staff, too, and to get to interview some of the, you know, George Beverly Shea, who just passed last week. And it was just great. It'd be a hard experience to top. I've done biographies of a lot of famous people, but that has to be the pinnacle right there.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, one thing that has always mesmerized me about Dr. Graham is he's perhaps the most respected and revered man in America in terms of being in the public eye. Yet he's not in the public eye, I mean, if there is such a thing. And he is the one person that I can say the press has never dared spin anything on. And even the press respects who he is and what he stands for. Why do you think that is? Because the press today is so brutal at times. And, you know, but there's never been, I mean, it's almost like they are afraid almost to say anything, you know, that would be to the contrary of who he is and what he stands for.
I think it's decades of consistency, and I also think there really is a spirit about him where you realize this is not somebody who's playing at it or pretending or using his position to make money or to be somebody. You can tell from the first, you know, word you hear out of his mouth that he believes this 100%. And, you know, when there has been things in his ministry or life that were, you know, potentially would open him for criticism. For instance, he was, you know, quoted or on tape even with Richard Nixon saying something that sounded disparaging to Jewish people. He immediately apologized for that and said he didn't even remember, you know, why he would say such a thing, and just clears it up. He doesn't try to defend or you know, protect himself. He's an open book.
Yeah, and you can't, I mean, he just has this aura about him that is just all God. And I've never actually, I mean, he lives here in North Carolina where I do, although he's in the mountains, I'm here in the center part of the state. But I have always wanted, you know, thought it would be the neatest thing to partake of a Billy Graham crusade. You know, there's just, I mean, there's been no other evangelist. You know, you have evangelists on television that have regular programming, but you've never had one evangelist that has ever gotten primetime spot in the evenings. You know, I just remember growing up and seeing the Billy Graham crusade was coming on, or my grandparents saying, "Okay, it's coming on." So it's just you know, like you say, it's the consistency and the longevity of his ministry that has made all the difference. And
it's so great now that I was going to say, it's so great now that he wants to do one last thing, you know, before his 95th birthday in November. And I saw a picture of him recently when he was at Bev Shea's funeral, and he's really frail. I mean, he's in a wheelchair, and it looks like it's hard for him to see and hear, and I know his voice is very weak, but somehow he's going to rally, and they'll produce it in such a way that you'll be able to hear his message loud and clear, and it'll be a wonderful event when that happens.
Oh, yeah, and it'll be a worldwide thing. I mean, because I think a lot of people will recognize this will be his one last hurrah in terms of what he's always done so well, and people will not want to miss it. It will be very, very phenomenal for sure. There's one last thing I wanted to ask you about before we wrap, and now I understand, I heard recently that there is going to be a new Left Behind movie coming out based on the first book, and it's going to be starring Nicolas Cage. Is that, did I hear that correctly, or is that in fact true?
That's what I've heard as well, and I've talked to the scriptwriter and producer, and they've invited me to visit the set. I think they're going to shoot this in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It was supposed to be fairly soon, but I think there's been a little delay because of Nicholas's schedule. I'm cautiously optimistic. I wasn't real thrilled with the original movies, although they did have their place and the people ministered to by them. But I think the noise of having a big name actor is going to help. I think the script is better than the previous ones. And I'm just hopeful that it starts the conversation again, and people get more interested in thinking about the end times and going back to church, reading the Bible, and hopefully preparing so they won't be left behind.
Yeah, that would be, I mean, that is the true objective. And how would you describe the movie script for this project as opposed to, say, the first Left Behind project that was, put out?
This one is really much more concentrated. It covers a shorter period of time. It begins, I'd say, about a half hour before Rayford gets on the plane to fly from Chicago to London, and it ends when he lands the plane back in the United States after the rapture has occurred and people disappear off the plane. So it's a lot of drama on the plane and what happened and how did they get back and that type of thing. So I think people, there'll be some who say they wish it was closer to the book or covered more ground, but I think it should be an exciting movie.
Oh yeah, I think it will be. Do you happen to know what they're shooting for in terms of the release date? Will it be this year? Will it be next year?
I think it's scheduled for early next year, spring next year.
Oh, okay. Okay. And I have one more question for you before we wrap. What do you consider to be your biggest accomplishment to date? Because you've accomplished a lot. So can you narrow that down to one thing, or is that even possible?
I think, and I'm not sure I should take credit for this, but we have 3 grown sons, and our 2 oldest are married, and both of them have 4 kids in their family, and 3 of those total 8 grandchildren of ours are adopted. And to me, whatever we did to raise kids that are that generous and that self-sacrificing, that's the biggest accomplishment. I mean, I'm more. If my kids never did anything else, I'm just thrilled to death that they would do that. My generation, we sent checks, but this generation, they take these kids in and raise them as their own, and that's probably the proudest thing in my life.
Oh, that's and being a parent of 3 myself, I can tell you, there's just no prouder feeling or better feeling to know that your kids are saved, they love the Lord, they're living for the Lord, and they're doing some great things in His name. And as a parent, that's the very best you could hope for your children.
That's
and then
for sure.
to see it happen before your eyes is a dream come true. And that far outweighs anything you could ever do, in terms of accomplishment's sake. So I do agree with you there in that respect.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you so very much for your time. It has been so nice talking with you and just having this opportunity to chat about the Left Behind series and just about you and all that you've done. And we really, I think I can speak for a lot of people, appreciate your contribution to, literature and fiction and what it has done for people everywhere. So thank you so very much. And best to you as you move forward.
Thanks so much, Donna. It was great to be with you.
All right. Well, thank you, Jerry, and take care, and God bless.
Thanks.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
We've been speaking with our very, very special guest, Jerry B. Jenkins, and he is the co-author of the Left Behind series, the famed Left Behind series, 63 million copies sold and beyond, and just a phenomenal person, has done so much, and so if you'd like to follow him on Twitter, he is at Jerry B. Jenkins, and you can, follow him and keep up with everything that he's got going on. And I actually, I was asking about the new installment of the Left Behind movie series that will star Nicolas Cage. I actually just came across that really recently and was excited to learn that they are going to produce an installment that's going to have a big actor because I believe, with it being on the big screen, it's really going to draw in a lot of folks. It's going to get great exposure, and it'll be a great story. And hopefully, like he said, it will get people talking about, things that are to come, and will make them think about it a little bit more than they would otherwise. So it was just such a pleasure having him with us tonight, and we thank him so very much for being our special guest. And we thank you, all of you, for being with us tonight. And if you're brand new to our program, welcome aboard. We're so glad to have you with us, and we hope that this will not be your last time here. And so we do appreciate you so very much, because without you, we couldn't do what we do. All right, well, that is going to wrap our show for tonight. Coming up tomorrow night, we will be right back here at 8 p.m. Eastern with our The Beat, which is our indie music show, and we play an hour of all Christian indie music, and I think you will enjoy that. So if you have time, want to kick back and just unwind from your week, please tune in. We're playing some great stuff, bringing all new music to you this week, so we look forward to that. 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Life Beats Radio. And with that, I will say good night and bid you a happy Friday and a beautiful, wonderful weekend. and a blessed weekend. And with that, I am your host, and we'll see you again real soon. Take care, all. Good night.